Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm particularly interested in the biodiesel industry, and I visited with Pacific Biodiesel. I hope they're members of your organization.
They're not members, but we deal. They're
good. They should become members,
yeah.
Probably. And the great thing about biodiesel is that it reuses products. And in the case of Pacific Biodiesel, they use hotel and restaurant oil, which otherwise would have to be disposed of with expense to those businesses. So, Madam Chair, I just wanted to mention to you that when I visited with them, that one of the first questions they asked was whether we were going to extend the biodiesel tax, and this was a real-life example of how the tax policies that we adopt here has an impact, and members of the industry, most of whom are small businesses, as you mentioned, they pay attention to what we're doing, so thank you for that. And Mr. Clemens, I just also wanted to mention that this committee has focused on the 15-year provision before, and so I want to thank you for coming and reiterating the importance of that time frame for restaurant renovations.
Well, we appreciate your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Gorman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate your having this hearing. I think this is terrific. Appreciate y'all being here and the testimony. It's kind of things people in Congress need to be reminded of apparently constantly. Apparently there's not a long-term memory here, and so we need that encouragement on a regular basis. Ms. Shepard, one of the last things you said is that if you had to pay tax twice on the same income, you said it would be a, quote, waste, unquote. And I would submit to you that it would only be a waste if you feel like you might happen to be able to spend money better than the wonderful people here in Washington. But otherwise, you know, somebody may need another monument to themselves up here or something like that. But
Bridge to nowhere.
Yeah, you know, we had a small business congressional delegation trip to China 3 years ago, and one of the things we did was talk to CEOs, people that had moved businesses to China. And I went with the impression, I'm from East Texas, I went with the impression that probably they were just moving over there for cheap labor. And that was what we were told, a small part but of the reason, but the driving force for most of them was a dramatic decrease in taxes, and that China was even flexible if it was a big enough business on negotiating income tax, and that when they looked at a corporate tax half of what we have here in the U.S. and the advantages that they were able to have, even though they had better quality control in the United States, they like being in the United States, they just couldn't turn down that kind of tax break. And then since I've been here, I come to know John Bruton, who took over as Prime Minister in Ireland when they had one of the worst economies in the world, and now as I understand it, they're maybe one of the top 5 fastest growing economies. And as best I can read and see, it sounds like the sole reason they turned that whole nation around from being one of the worst to one of the best as far as economies was they dramatically dropped the business tax. And now businesses are moving in there, people have jobs again, the kids are not rushing to get out of Ireland. And then of course he turned things around there, they did, by dropping their taxes, and now the European Union has John Bruton as their ambassador to the U.S. They wanted his input on how we turn Europe around, and now I understand that much of the European Union is looking at dropping taxes and following that lead, and we seem to be the only advanced nation in the world that's talking about increasing our taxes instead of decreasing them. And as far as the discussion about the death tax, there's been some good points made about that, but I can't forget this gentleman in my district in East Texas. He's a small business owner, they're in the timber business, and they have a bunch of land. and they're land rich and money poor. But he approached me and he said, "You got to do something about the death tax." I'm sure you're aware, in 2010, there will be no death tax, right?
For a moment.
For that year. And then in 2011, it kicks back to the 55%, that basically a socialist notion that the government needs over half of the estate that's been accumulated despite taxes having been paid on all of that. And he said, my children are all grown, they're in the business, and they got together and hired an accountant who has advised them that if I die in 2010, they keep all of the estate, but if I have the indecency to make it to January 1 of 2011, they're going to lose half of the estate, and they're kind of encouraging me that, not to take care of himself. And he said, I'm beginning to get a little worried if I make it to December of that year, if you guys in Washington haven't done something. He was kind of kidding, but you could see there was concern in his eyes. So anyway, I appreciate, Madam Chair, you're having this hearing. I think everybody in Washington needs to be reminded we are hurting our country by taxing the people that are providing the jobs. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gomer.
Overly taxing, that is.
Mr. Ellsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just made a note to myself, don't build any monuments to myself, and if I build a bridge in Indiana, it should go somewhere. I also was going to give Mr. Shepard a chance to elaborate, so thank you, Mr. Shabbat. Mr. Kilduff, you are going to benefit from Mr. Shabbat recognizing Mr. Shepard. You said you would like to address the carried interest. Sometimes in Washington, as you know, we implemented PAYGO, and you call out that as a pay-for. Would you elaborate? I'll give you my 5 minutes to elaborate on that unintended consequences, something that happens to us quite a bit up here, and obviously that's something we don't like, but please elaborate on that, help us understand that better, how that affects you.
Sure, I'd love to.